call the meeting to order for Redevelopment Commission on August 15th, 2022. First item on the agenda is roll call. Commissioners present, please.
Here.
Deborah Meyerson here.
Randy Cassidy here.
Cindy Canarney here. Staff present.
John Zodi, hand director.
Christina Finley, hand department.
Larry Allen, legal.
Alex Raleigh, Economic Sustainable Development.
All right, thank you. Next item of business is reading of the minutes for August 1st, 2022. Do any commissioners have any questions or modifications? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve minutes.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. Vote via roll call, please.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Next item of business is examination of claims for August 5th, 2022 for $348,141.77. Do any commissioners have any questions regarding this? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll make a motion to approve the claims of August 5th.
Deb Hutton, second.
We have a first and a second. Vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Next item of business is examination of payroll registers for July 29th, 2022 for $34,420.85. Do any commissioners have any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Randy Cassidy, I'll make a motion to approve.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
I will entertain a vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Next item of business is report of officers and committees. Is there a director's report?
There is, Madam President, 3 items. Number one, just make sure commissioners know we're headed into budget, or we're in budget season, but our budget presentation for the hand department will most likely be Wednesday, August 31st. And so that whole week you'll hear budget presentations from departments, and we're in the middle of that process now, and by our next meeting that'll have happened, so I wanted to make sure you knew that. Also, something that will hopefully come to you at the next meeting or the one right after that is the sale of the West Kirkwood property, 1306 West Kirkwood, which is a little house we've been had on the market. We're in a bid period right now. We're waiting to see if we get any other bids. We do have one, and we'll close that out at the end of the month. And then just as a follow-up, we do have our rehab guidelines meeting. The staff and I are meeting tomorrow to start that conversation as mentioned to you all previously, to get the rehab guidelines, look at revising those. So that's it. That's my only report now.
All right, thank you. Is there a legal report?
No legal report. I'm happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have.
All right, thank you. Is there a treasurer's report? All right, not hearing one. Moving on. CTP report.
Yeah, sort of more broadly, but in terms of a couple of things. One is I wanted to let everybody know we had a really successful ribbon cutting for the 4th Street Garage art piece. This was, I guess, a week ago, and it's just great to see that piece up there. In terms of the Certified Tech Park generally, we do have a slight presentation this evening, but generally speaking, the Trades District, we're starting to see some renewed interest in land sales, in some of the structures. We'll talk about the kiln as part of the agenda, but for what was a fairly dead period for a couple of years, things are starting to kind of move again. So that's good. So we'll come to you, of course, with details as they become available, but just want to give you a sense of what was happening there.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to new business, Resolution 22-54, Amendment to Conveyance Agreement for Showers Kiln. Who'd like to speak to us regarding this?
So I'll start. Larry can jump in, and then we also have 2 members of the Kiln Collective here to maybe help answer questions, talk a little bit about the project. Basically, if you all remember, we had a conveyance agreement of the kiln which is the building just to the north of the Dimension Mill. And with the Kiln Collective, which is a group of local business interests. And then the pandemic hit. And so with all of the joys that brought, we put that project and the momentum, unfortunately, suffered as a result, but we put it on ice for a while. The Kiln Collective is interested in picking it back up again. We had an agreement in place that had a whole bunch of dates that became somewhat obsolete. So really, functionally, what we're trying to accomplish today is just to clean up the dates, get this thing back in motion, make sure the dates are appropriate given where we are now, and then maybe I can turn it over to them to talk a little bit about the project. There is a change to it in that we originally came forward both to the Redevelopment Commission, Plan Commission, and HPC, Historic Preservation Commission. They had a design that was a multi-story design on the kiln. That is not out of the realm of possibility, but it'll be more, at this point, anticipated as a ground floor renovation with the option to continue into secondary floors. So maybe I'll pause, and do you want to say a few things about what the project is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. We went through, some of you have already heard me complain about this multiple times over drinks, but we went through some challenges with the cost explosion just being crazy and unable to pull the trigger on the project. The rents essentially become excessively high. We're trying to have the building be owner occupied, keep the square foot price at a reasonable, even if above market, but close to market level, so that we can justify bringing our companies in there. And that just wasn't possible for a while there. So we've been looking at restructuring some of the partners and taking off like a smaller bite to start with. Just doing the first floor renovation to get the project going, to get that eyesore out of next door to the mill, which I see all the time. Get something happening there, hopefully with the possibility to still continue to build on top of that as we go. That could change though. Costs could come to the right spot, or we could find the right additional set of tenants to make the building bigger before we actually start building. But right now we're just excited to get started on something, to get the ball rolling, and to do that we've got to have these dates changed to be able to actually start to execute the agreement.
So I would maybe add a couple of things, and correct me if I'm wrong here. One is, I think it was included in the packet, was a kind of rough design of what that ground floor looks like. So the ground floor renovation is essentially what it was going to be before. The building was never built to be habitable, right? It was not intended for human habitation. So it's not a small undertaking to turn what is essentially an oven into a building that people can live in. So that's part of the challenge. The second thing is, if you look at the design, you'll see that there are these stubs on the roof. So the idea is to, as part of the ground floor renovation, to build into that renovation already the infrastructure to be able to build a second building on top. And the secondary floors of the building, I didn't realize this, but that was always a different building than the original building. It was just sitting on top of it. So in a sense, this sequence of going from one floor to two floors is really not that materially different, other than a timing perspective, because the second floors were always going to be a separate structure from the first floors.
And those things on the top are for the stairwells up and the elevator as well. Final designs, obviously, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Conceptually, that's the idea, is that there'll be some infrastructure there in order to be able to, at the very least, we hope to be able to use the rooftop deck in some time period and then build on top of that.
Yeah. So anyway, we still think it's a worthwhile project. As Mike said, it's sitting next door to the mill, which is a significant RDC investment. We'd love to see that activated. It's been a long time coming. This seems to be still the right group to be able to do it. They are motivated to do it. The deal points really haven't changed materially. The dates have changed, and we just want to get this thing on, going and activated and people in the building.
And we do anticipate that we'll have to go back before some other groups as well.
Yeah.
On the design side of it,
Yeah.
with these changes, but which is extra work but I think worth it to at least get the ball rolling.
All right, any questions or comments from commissioners?
Just curious who your intended tenant is?
Well, there's several. It's mostly the folks who are working on the building, so us at Sprout Box, which we're not exactly sure who that's going to be. We originally were expecting that it would be periodic, but they're actually have grown faster because this building happened out of sequence from when we were planning. But we know that the Sprout Box offices will be there. My company, Cheddar, will likely be there. And some additional technology tenants. The goal is to, especially to use some of the base space to create graduation space and high visibility for startups coming out of the mill. So, one of the things, the mill's awesome, but when you're in there, you're kind of in there. The idea that we can have some visible spaces that can still use some of the amenities at the mill, and still be members of the mill potentially, but also have their own sign, their own place, their own window, and step for the business as it grows. So those are the ideal tenants. We'll also have Don, who's the builder on the project. They're at 11th and Rogers now, will also join us in the building as well. So we're excited to have our builders. We think we'll get a good building because our builders are moving into the same building with us.
And then one of the other tenants is Soma Coffee Shop, which has been a highly requested amenity in that area by the folks in the mill, and so that would be coffee, food right there.
Grab and go food.
Grab and go.
Is something. I mean, we love having Upland next to us. But Upland's coffee isn't that great. No offense to them. And it's not a grab and go. Their beer is great. It's great in the evening, but in the middle of the day, yes, I do. They won't be too angry. But in the middle of the day, it's really convenient to be able to run into a place like Soma. And also, one of the things that some of the co-working spaces in Indy have learned about having coffee spaces like Buddy Bones Coffee in Union 525, it's like a huge change in terms of the types of people who will come into the area. Right now, the mill feels a little bit like you need to be a member to enter. We try to make it as welcome as possible to folks, but you still sort of feel like, am I supposed to be here? Do I need to be here when someone else isn't here? The coffee shop vibe allows people to have meetings in a public space and to activate the tech park in a way that we currently can't do. So we're excited about that as well.
Still got to go through the historic world, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the changes will trigger. Again, depending on if we do make as dramatic of changes in the first phase here on this project, yes.
And actually, I think theoretically that would be an easier conversation than the conversation we had the first time, which was adding to a historic building. Now we're taking the historic building as it's historically been built. So theoretically, it's even better aligned.
Because God bless you for trying it. It's a difficult building.
Yeah, like Alex said, it's meant to house lumber and.
It's a difficult building with historical significance, though, to the entire story of the mill and the kiln.
Yeah, it adds.
And location is critical. So it is difficult, but it's worth it.
Yep.
And at this first phase, it's just offices for local IT to get things off and going. At the second phase, are we adding any long-term living or not? Or is that a dead deal? I noticed it said.
As it stands, Larry, correct if I'm wrong, but I think there's a prohibition on residential for 10 years in the current agreement, which I don't think has changed as a result of this. And so potentially in the future, depending on what use case is made for it, there's an option of having residential. For the time being, it is primarily, as is the trades district, designed to be more office serving than home.
Okay, yeah. Office is good. We always have to have people living where they work, and that way we can keep our walk score up where it needs to be. So just ask that question in regards to it. I mean, the agreement's been hammered out. Yeah.
What was the reason for the prohibition on residential for 10 years? Is it just because of the emphasis on redevelopment for office purposes, or?
Yeah, I mean, so, the trades district is a certified tech park, which is a kind of structural thing. And so the whole idea behind it is you want to drive, so literally what happens is sales tax and payroll tax from this broader certified tech park goes up to Indianapolis, comes back to us. The reason it comes back to us is to reinvest and try to stimulate, in this case, the technology park, technology and innovation businesses. So if you start, and we don't actually, I mean, you think of the Trades District as being kind of the big place. It's really not. You know, when you think about it, it's not a huge amount of acreage. So the question is, how do you maximize what's missing, the product that's missing in Bloomington, which is really flexible office space, maybe Class A office space. How do you maximize the opportunity to have that on what is fundamentally a limited footprint? And the way you do that, and you sort of, it's either or, right? You can't. You know, you do want to have, as Randy says, you do want to have you don't want the place to go dark, dead at night when everybody leaves the office, so you want to have some amount of housing. It's just a balancing act. So when we did the master plan, this is before my time, it was always anticipated that there would be some housing, but primarily it would be for the technology and innovation sectors. There is a question out there right now that we're grappling with, which is, does anybody go to the office anymore, and will they ever? And so what's that going to do to the balance? But right now we're trying to hold to that line on the assumption that maybe things snap back, maybe not entirely to what they were before, but at least reflective of what what the market needs. And that's why we tried to suppress the housing, which, as you know, in Bloomington, you could snap your fingers and get all the student housing that you need in there, and we're definitely trying to keep that out and try to really keep our eye on the ball.
Yeah, we want technology. We want technology hubs, offices, the high-end wages coming in,
Right.
and people being able to live nearby.
Right.
But not just supporting the housing for the student population.
Right.
So that's a hell of a balance
Yeah,
to try
and
to
it's-
attain.
It's fluid, right?
From a financing standpoint, it's got to be difficult also.
Yeah.
So.
And it is part of the challenge with the finances for this project, so to support it as a 100% commercial project, when there's a lot of vacant commercial, just due to the pandemic. So that's one of the challenges, which is part of the reason for scaling back and just putting our arms around what we know we can do, and then just see how the market plays out, how the future holds, in terms of what, I know there's always requests, or more of a request nowadays for the live-work arrangements, where you live and work right in the same place, so. But that wasn't a request that we made in coming back here. It was just to get the scope around the commercial structure, go forward and get it functional again.
Get it where it looks good.
I mean, unrelated to the Kiln building, I'll just comment more from a Trades District and Bill perspective in general. A lot of it is momentum based, right? One of the things is to try to make sure that that particular area becomes an area for technology and not necessarily for student housing, which would be very easy to happen. And so there's an element of getting a momentum going of office and then adding, setting the tone for the area, which I think was the initial goal of the city. I don't put words in the city's mouth, but I think that's been the goal for the area for a long time.
So based upon where you're at, what you need, you got 10 years, it's gonna be office before you do anything else, or have the ability to do, the sooner the better to do it. Are you guys looking at it from a time frame standpoint, being able to start 6 months, a year? What's your realistic thought process based on financing and such of that nature? Because
Let Don answer that one.
Yeah, I think, and based on the dates in the new conveyance agreement, I think we're looking at, our hope is in, by early next year here, that we've got financing secured and plans assembled, and, things are, put together that we could start construction, renovation of it next year.
All right, any other questions from commissioners? Any comment from the public? Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion for Resolution 22-54.
Randy Cassidy, I'll make a motion to approve for the amendment.
Deb Hutton, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. I need a vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canardi, yes. Next item up for business is Resolution 22-55, access and license agreement with Centerstone of Indiana. Who'd like to speak to the group about this?
Mr. Allen's going to. It's related to Hopewell.
As you all know, we're getting ready to get started. We have been for a while on Phase 1 East of Hopewell, and as part of Phase 1 East of Hopewell, there's new right-of-way being installed to extend the streets through both north and south and east and west through the Hopewell property. Particularly the north-south street requires some of the property that's currently used by Centerstone for their parking lot to become part of the new right-of-way. And so what this access agreement does essentially is gives us the ability to help start that process of entering onto their property, reconfiguring some of that parking lot as we've had negotiations with them in terms of how that design is going to work, where the right-of-way is going to work while maintaining their parking at the building. There's another aspect to this, which is we've also agreed to demolish one of their houses for them as part of the agreement. And the ownership of these parcels are kind of intermixed at this corner of the lot. So you actually have the Centerstone building. The Centerstone building itself is owned by the county. Centerstone owns parts of the parking lot, and they own the house. And then we have some now RDC-owned property in the middle of that, and we own part of the parking lot as well, or you all own part of the parking lot as well. So we're just trying to clean that, have that all together in one agreement to say, we have access to your lot so that we can start this process of planning to reconfigure it, build the infrastructure that's needed, and then as they requested us to do, we've also agreed to go ahead and demolish the house while we're there, and that's all been approved by the necessary boards as far as I understand it. I'm happy to answer, of course, any questions. But.
Any questions from commissioners?
The house that we're demolishing on their behalf, that's 416 West First,
Yeah.
the bungalow?
Yep.
Okay. Because that's part of what our first phase of demolition.
That will
That's
be
correct.
part of the demolition as
It'll
well.
be part
Yes,
of the
that's
demolition.
correct.
And when we hit the licensor parcels, is this going to be just a future parking lot for them? Is that the intent, or?
Yeah, there's some reconfiguration of the parking lot that was part of the plating that has been submitted. It kind of curves around the building at this point. There's also a little bit of extension up to the new east-west street of where they're able to park. What it's done though is right now their parking lot extends a little bit farther east than is possible with the new right-of-way, so it does narrow that parking lot significantly and then wrap it around the building. That was one of the key parts of what Centerstone was concerned about, obviously, is having not only their employees, but also some of their visitors and their clients be able to have some parking there. We also anticipate, just to be really clear, there's going to be some street parking also along so once that infrastructure is created, there will be some street parking there as well for their clients. So that was part of the count that we were trying to make happen and make sure that they had some access to that building.
Okay. So when we look at this on that and we reconfigure accordingly, that'll be part of the bond issue that the city has to reissue as we go through reconstruction of this?
So currently that's planned on being TIF generated, so TIF revenue generated, so not necessarily a bond issue.
Well,
I mean, obviously if it's needed, that would potentially happen. So this is something that's already planned that we've kind of budgeted for this Phase 1 East. It's obviously very important to get this first part of it kicked off, and the infrastructure's, I mean, honestly, it's very exciting in terms of what we're trying to build there through the Greenway and these streets. It's gonna make a profound difference. We also think even to Centerstone, but also the businesses that are there, just because you're going to be able to activate this block much better than you ever were before. Currently, it's a large industrial block that's mostly parking lots, and this is likely one of the few parking lots that will remain, except for any development that happens on the north end. So.
Well, the reason I ask that is we make that around and we're configuring and we're tearing down what we refer to as the glove factory at the corner, which Centerstone has their housing units in.
Mm-hmm.
The only question I ask there, as we lose dwelling units, do we have an equivalent number of dwelling units that will go back so we just don't enhance a surface parking lot by reconfiguration? To give someone, whether it be a private developer, a nonprofit developer, whoever, to be able to utilize that desirable area, which again goes to walkability and the ability to have downtown grocery, those things that make our community what we want it to be, and not just reconfigure one that doesn't allow for increased residential and, live work even. But that's the reason I asked that, because we're reconfiguring and taking at least 6 dwelling units out as we reconfigure, which is fine if we have the ability to put something back in the future and don't just limit it to a trade with just service parking. That would be my question.
So in terms of the number of dwelling units, I can't give you an exact count of what's planned, but that's been part of the master plan from the beginning. That's one of the key critical things for Phase 1 East is to make additional, particularly affordable housing, but also a good mix of housing. It's one of the conversations, obviously, we had with City Council when we took the right-of-way vacation, where we are vacating the alleys. We've agreed to, just in terms of nuts and bolts, so some of these parcels will be they're going to be carved up a little bit smaller, but we anticipate there being significant parcel development from the developers as we go out to bid, and that they will be able to more than replace those units. This is targeted for new housing, and particularly new affordable housing, and particularly if you look at the north of the block on the master plan, north of the Greenway, that's anticipated. Understanding that we are still in the beginning phase of this process, so that's my caveat. It's anticipated, though, that that's going to be some of the most dense housing in the entire block, just because it makes sense from the topography of it, the way you're activating the downtown in terms of it makes sense to have increased density there. And as you move south and west along that property, have more like single-family houses, which are also being planned, which you'll see some development and movement on as well. The other caveat I would just say is one of the things that there was a lengthy discussion with City Council about also creating an overlay for this area. And so that's something you'll be a part of that discussion as we get closer to targeting what kind of developments we're going to have, what kind of housing, what that's going to look like, height, density, all that stuff's going to be coming back to you. But yeah, in terms of, that's a long-winded answer, but just to say this particular block, Phase 1 East, is targeted for a lot of housing and significant amount of housing for this project.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions on Resolution 22-55?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
I'll ask them both to Larry, and then you can answer them together. Hi, Larry. You mentioned that I see the parking configuration is changing for Centerpoint, and you said it was going to get squeezed. So question A is, are they going to maintain the same number of parking spots, lose or gain? And the second question is, in the demolition and the reconfiguring to this shape of parking lot, quite a few trees. And of course, they could have been scrub trees or pop-up trees, but nonetheless, there's a fair bit of green stuff that is being lost, and so I wondered if there's a plan for any greenscaping to this new parking configuration, which is sort of solid asphalt concrete. Thanks.
Yeah, so as to the first part, they are losing some parking. They're not maintaining the exact number of spaces. That's why we also felt important just to highlight some of the on-street parking. There's a little bit there. We've made Centerstone aware of that. They know the amount that they're losing in terms of, and also we've tried to keep it as close as possible. We floated some other ideas, but under our UDO, some of them just weren't possible. So this is what was possible. I would also say in terms of the designscape, in terms of what you're talking about greenery, that's part of the planning review of this process as well, is to look at what we're replanting, what we're doing, and what's required there. I don't know that we've gotten the final sign off for that particular portion for planning, but I do know that that's part of the review process that we're undergoing right now, is trying to figure out what do we need to put back in. And then also keeping in mind, just generally, planning has its own requirements, so very particular requirements under the UDO in terms of how much green space, also is how many islands are required in that, and where the curb cuts and everything like that are. But from the overall project, remember that we're also adding a significant greenway in the middle of this block. That's going to be a substantial enhancement to what's currently there in terms of getting rid of some of that impervious surface that covers the whole block right now.
Thanks.
Any other questions on Resolution 22-55 from commissioners? If not, I'll ask for any comment from the public. Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion for Resolution 22-55.
Deb Hutton, I move to approve resolution number 2255.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. I need a vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Next item of business is Resolution 22-56, agreement with BCA Environmental for Phase 1 analysis. Who'd like to speak to us regarding this?
I think unfortunately you're going to hear from me a lot. The next three resolutions are related, just FYI, although happy to take them each individually. So you all approved, obviously, the purchase agreement with CFC to kind of start the process of theoretically purchasing the CFC portion of the showers building for use of the public safety for the city of Bloomington. We are now in the due diligence phase from that approval. And so we have several steps to that due diligence, and we want to be as thorough as possible in terms of making sure that the building is suitable for the uses that we've proposed, particularly with public safety. The first part of that is just doing a basic phase 1 analysis. We've done these before. Because this building is already developed, though, this really doesn't fit within our brownfields grant, which is normally how we would do a phase 1. So what we've done here is we're going outside of that particular grant process and contracting for this particular phase 1 itself. We have an older phase 1 from 1994 on this property, which is when the building when it was acquired by CFC for redevelopment, for refurbishment into their uses. So it's definitely time for an update, and also just for some of the bona fide purchaser protections, for the city of Bloomington, it's required. So we found that BCA was responsive and they were the best choice, and so we have asked them to provide a phase 1. I believe this is $2,800. I'm not looking at it right now, but I believe it's $2,800 for the phase 1. And of course, if there is anything that warrants a phase 2, we would come back to you and kind of update you what we found in the phase 1 and then ask for the phase 2.
So why don't you go ahead and explain or walk through the other two,
Sure, of course.
if that works.
So in resolution, as long as we name the resolutions at the end
Yeah.
in terms of what we're voting for, that's fine. So resolution 2257, which is an agreement with Tabor Bruce for due diligence investigation. This is overall kind of in investigating the status or the condition that the building and its mechanical systems are in. That includes walls, windows, doors, roof, solar system, plumbing, electrical, basically everything that you would possibly think of as we need to know about this particular building for its overall suitability. So that's very important here. Overall suitability is just for what it's already being used for an office space. That's what Tabor Bruce is able to do for us. They're going to be subcontracting out with other people to kind of organize that, and they were willing to take that on. They were able to take it on within the due diligence period and give us an idea of the current condition of the building. So that's resolution 2257 and what their possibility is. I will note in the contract with Tabor Bruce, we did have some language in there that they may also be able to subcontract with someone who was certified to look at this as specifically for police station use, since it's public safety. What we would determine in the meantime, though, is it might be it's better to actually have that as a separate contract. So that's what you see in resolution 2258 actually, is an agreement with Spring Point architects, for the public safety evaluation. In order to qualify to host something like a police station, in order to design that space, you have to have a certification. So there are only a limited number of architectural companies in the United States that are qualified to kind of design these types of spaces. And so one of the things we wanted to do, again, to make sure that the space is perfectly suitable, we have Tabor Bruce looking at the condition of the building overall, those mechanical systems, getting ready on that. But we also need a specialist to come in and look at, is this going to be suitable for use as a police station? So that includes, is the structure sound enough? Does it meet all the requirements? And also, is there enough space, and is it configurable in a way that you would need to have the enhanced security that you would need for a police station? So that includes evidence room, and is it lockable from the rest of the space, and what kind of risk design building is the building built for, and things like that. I am not an expert in that. I have had a crash course in the last 2 weeks about these particular requirements, but what we've done here is there was Springport Architects had worked with our police department in the past, and they designed the facility that's south of town for them. And what they agreed to do is kind of be a local liaison so that we would have a point of contact with one of these national firms. And we reached out to SpringPoint on our behalf, has already reached out to several of the firms and identified a few of the best ones. And we've actually have already found who would be able to do it in an appropriate time frame. I will say we're currently trying to figure out what that time frame is in terms of when we could get that report, but they're going to be subcontracting with a very particular certified specialist for the police station aspect of it.
Okay.
Any questions from commissioners?
I'm just trying to parse out, I certainly understand the need for the specialized expertise for the facility investigation. I'm not crystal clear on why two different architectural firms need to be contracted, why SpringPoint, for example, might not do the due diligence and subcontract for the specialty, so just help me understand that, please.
Yeah, so SpringPoint, we've worked with Tabor Bruce in terms of doing these types of mechanical analyses before, and they have a lot of relationships with a lot of the contractors that are necessary for that particular type of review. We're not asking Tabor Bruce, for instance, to design the building or do anything like that. So that was one of the key factors, is those existing relationships. Also, time has been a factor, so the length of this due diligence period to try to get this information. And one of the things we just came across as we were trying to work this out, and that was one of our questions as well, is why wouldn't we just do this under one, is also the timing of managing all of these resources and making sure we're getting the most thorough reports that we're concentrating on. And so we did have a little bit of I don't know if it's even a concern, but it was just an emphasis on, we want to make sure that we're doing this as carefully as possible and we're not overtaxing the individuals that were contracted. We were asking Tabor Bruce to do a lot already in terms of the full systems analysis of the building and to see if it's going to be suitable for office. SpringPoint, because they also have the relationship with our police department, and they've done this, and they've already had identified several licensed other architects that they've worked with, and they've done that kind of work before. That's one of the reasons why they were targeted individually for this, because they have a good working relationship. We know what their professional work is for police work specifically, and also they had this relationship with these certified architects. So that's why we decided to break this off into two parts. And so what will happen here is we just won't utilize that part of Tabor Bruce. We did build that into the contract initially, but we're not going to utilize that portion of the contract.
One quick follow-up to that, which is just, I'm trying to understand where, it would seem like the due diligence would be useful to have first in terms of sequence, because there might be then factors that are discovered as part of that would then factor into the overall specialized facility. And that's just, as a relative layperson, kind of my impression, but I'm just asking because I understand the idea of contracting with two firms for expediting within a fairly compact amount of time in terms of the option to purchase. But nonetheless, I'm trying to get a sense of whether that due diligence might turn up information that would be important to know prior to doing the specialized.
And that is actually the order of operations we believe that this will happen in. And to be clear, SpringPoint and the certified architect they're also part of that due diligence and looking for those requirements. But in terms of what we anticipate being the order of operations, in terms of what each of it represents to us, we believe we're going to get the due diligence back from Tabor Bruce earlier, and then we would share that with the specialists for it to inform any of their items. Things like plumbing and electrical and whether the solar's working on the roof, probably less important than having a structural engineer look at the walls and the shape of everything. But we anticipate we'll get that report back first. We'll be able to share it with the specialists so that it can also inform any extra information that they need to have. So we're not walling those two off by any stretch of the imagination. But I think you're right there, where you could discover something very serious, and obviously all of this is going to go into the decision making too of whether this is feasible, whether it's feasible for the purposes. So.
Any other questions on Resolution 22-56, 22-57, and 22-58 from
I'll
commissioners?
have a couple.
Go ahead.
Thanks. The first one has to do with 56, and that is in item number 8.0, non-scope services. Just so I understand, so clarification, Larry, but it's after the evaluation. So does that mean that these non-scope services like asbestos, radiation, floodplains, et cetera, will not be considered in the assessment?
I would have to look at that language, Deb. I'm happy to pull it up here. I don't have it in front of me, just memorized. Give me just a
So
second.
I'm just wondering if they're in or they're out of what we're paying for.
Yeah, my recollection is that they are in, but it's part of a historic analysis of some of the document review. So in terms of non-scope services, some of that we have already received some of that due diligence from CFC themselves, and we are undergoing that document review ourselves just to see. And so I think that that's what you're referring to. Actually, just give me a second. Let me look at the language and I can tell you.
Page 53 of our packet.
No, thank you. And if you have other questions in the meantime, I'm happy to listen to them. And
Okay, well, my other
compartmentalize.
question is sort of very broad. It has to do with both 2257 and 2258. Deputy Mayor Griffin, when he presented his points of view to us of why we should do this, we as a city in the RDC, was that it would be a perfect spot for both the police department headquarters and the fire department headquarters. And yet, looking through both of these, the complete assessment, the CALIA certification items, and Spring Point and Bruce Tabor, everything is directed at police department. Mike Dekoff is the project manager. There's no mention of fire department. And so has fire department been pushed off to some other location? Or is it, I don't accept that a fire department would fall under the assessment for a police department necessarily, that you can't transmit from to the others, one to the other. So I just want an explanation of why this right now, these two have to do with police department use only.
Yeah, that has to do, let me answer your second question, I'll go back to your first. The second question is because of who would be moving into the building and what it would be used for. So in terms of fire, it's fire administration as opposed to all of fire services. So it wouldn't be treated as a fire station itself, it would just be fire administration. And so there aren't really special categories for that necessarily. That can be basically they can utilize office space. They would obviously have a presence, and they currently do in the fire stations as well. I know the Chief Moore is very interested in being present with the individuals there, so he always maintains an office at Fire Station 1, for instance. And so likely what would happen there is that fire administration would be located there, only it wouldn't be a fire station. Where we get into the specialized need for fire departments is building those fire stations, and in terms of looking at those analysis and the need for a new Fire Station 1, which is something that's been discussed, of course we are using qualified and licensed architects to evaluate those possibilities as well. But it's just not needed for this space. I'm sorry?
Are we assuming that the fire department headquarters administration only doesn't need anything more than any administrative place, or have they've said, yep, that's true, we don't need anything specialized, and we'll just consider us administrative? Is that?
Yeah, we're not assuming it. They are involved in this process in terms of evaluating the building. They're part of the meetings as well. So we are following their lead, but it's not assumed.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of the first question, just looking at this list, you're correct. So what this isn't part of the scope because they are not necessarily doing any intrusive search, so they're not drilling the walls to look for asbestos. The rest of these are largely specialized testing, so either by an environmental firm or just looking at historical maps and data from the EPA. So that's correct. This will not be part of the scope in terms of what they're looking for. Now, if they see something in the part of their investigation, so mold is listed in here, for instance. The way this has been explained to me and what I can, kind of represent to you is that basically they're going to go through the whole building. They're going to do a visual analysis of the walls. If they do see something like that, they're probably going to recommend that we do a more in-depth search or a specialized search. And at that point, we would try to engage those services and look for those things.
Thank you very much, Larry.
And one quick follow-up, which is there any contingency amongst these different, in the sense of, let's just say that something came up from the environmental analysis that precluded the real, moving ahead with due diligence, or if due diligence turned up something that really made it not feasible to move forward with the specialized analysis? Is that built into how these are structured?
It is a little bit. I mean, we're trying to walk and chew gum at the same time, which makes that a little bit difficult. But yeah, if we have information where it's a full stop, there's nothing that we've seen so far, what we've received from CFC in the preliminary analysis, to indicate that we've seen anything of that level to make it full stop. So in terms of if we're going to cancel the contract, for instance, for the specialist, obviously, if we found something and it's an absolute deal breaker, we're going to call them immediately and be like, please stop work. And we'd have to pay them for the work that they had done up to that point, but they just wouldn't get the full amount of the contract for everything, right? So we'd have to negotiate that with them, and I think that's possible. Certainly, every once in a while, that comes up as something we've done regularly with our contracts. It's not common, but it happens.
One quick question dealing with the public safety analysis. We're engaging a local firm, which is a wonderful thing to do. Does that cost also include the specialist that would be subcontract?
Yep.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's $50,000 is what they estimated overall. That includes everything, all inclusive. Obviously, specialists come at a much greater cost.
So one quick question, Larry. So just remind me again the end of the due diligence period.
Yeah, so it was technically 60 days from the date you all approved the agreement, which I think puts it, it's in the middle of September. I just want to get the date right. Apologize. Yeah, September 16th is the end of the due diligence period. Now, what we're trying to determine and what we would keep in communication with CFC about is if anything's going to get pushed beyond this, kind of similar to your questions before, Commissioner Meyerson, which is to say if something comes up or just it's clear that this is going to be impossible before in that timeline, we would have to go to CFC and ask for an extension of the due diligence period, which we anticipate they would at least work with us on, and we would keep you apprised of as well. And so that might be something that we need to make sure. And that's why we're trying to nail down the timeline also for the specialists and when they can get in here and how long it might take them to produce a report. Up till now, who we've engaged with, we're fairly comfortable, but we're looking into nailing down all those timelines because it's tight.
Right.
We also want to build in a review process to have time to consume it, to put it all together, and to make sure that we can give you the best recommendation possible in terms of what you want to do with the building.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Any comment from the public? Not hearing any. I will entertain a motion for Resolution 22-56, 22-57, and 22-58.
This is Deborah. I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 22-56, -57, and -58.
Hutton, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. I need a roll call vote, please.
Jim Hutton, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Next item of business is general and business discussion. Is there any items that we need to discuss?
I'd like to bring up one thing for the good of the order in the RDC. At an Indiana Construction Roundtable Economic Conference, I didn't run into a presentation, and the redevelopment director for the city of Carmel, Henry Mesteski, and another gentleman that runs the redevelopment for the city of Fort Wayne. Henry Metaski, who happens to have been an Indiana University School of Law grad and has a affection for Bloomington, says we've got great bones to make things happen, has invited us as a redevelopment to come up and tour and see what they have done, if we'd be so inclined to do that. That in checking with our legal authority and such, that would have to be a situation where we would have to identify how we do that in order to keep everything correct. Just as what I would refer to as a field trip to just get other ideas to see if there's something to do. I just wanted to bring that up and see if the other commissioners might be so inclined at some point.
Well, and one thing that I think about is if there's a broader collaboration between, many other stakeholders in the community to go and visit. I know that the community has done this in the past, visit various locations and see how things are done in various other communities. for best practices, etc. So it seems like there also could be a broader collaboration if we wanted to entertain something like this.
I appreciate the suggestion. I would be interested in pursuing that if that, depending on the feasibility, but that certainly sounds to be of interest. I'd love to see what other communities have done to inform what we could do locally.
And just some of the creative ideas. So if it's all right with you guys, I'll just make sure send Henry Larry's information, let those two, since they're both, competent attorneys and taking care of both communities, see if we can put things together.
Yeah, so we'd be happy to receive that, and we'll put it together. We'll try to get a sense of people's availability and interest, and Alex, probably work with Alex just to see if we want a broader coalition that would be interested in that. Of course, we'd have to, if you all are getting together to receive any information, we're going to publicly notice that as a meeting in terms of where it happens and all of that good stuff, but I'd be happy to receive that information and kind of coordinate them. Probably rely on Christina more than she would appreciate to coordinate your all schedules, so I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. Anything else under general business? Not hearing any, I will entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Moved.
One, so moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night, everyone.
Good night.